Hello everyone. In this tutorial, what we'll be covering is PHP strings, and since we'll be using PHP strings quite a bit, it's a good idea to have a decent understanding about PHP strings. So as we know, before we can use a string, we must create it. And you can use strings in functions or variables. So just as a quick review here, let's create this variable called a variable, and we're going to assign to this variable the string, the PHP basics. And just to make things easier to read, I'm going to put in a line break here and end it with a semicolon. And we can also create an echo string, and we can say the exact same thing. And again, put a line break in here, double quotes and semicolon. So as we know with variables, once we declare that variable and assign a string to it, we can use that variable multiple times in our code or within the PHP scripting block. But for the echo string, it's not been stored anywhere. So let me just go ahead and echo out this variable that we created. And I'm going to go ahead and save this file as strings.php. And go over to my browser, type in localhost, the PHP basics /strings.php. And as we can see, it displays the PHP basics twice as it should. So moving on here, what you can also do is create strings with single quotes. You don't necessarily have to use double quotes. So let's say, for example, let me just go ahead and write a comment up here to say single quotes. And we're going to create the same scenario here. We're going to have a variable named a variable. And you know what? Let's make this a variable 2. And I'm going to assign to it the PHP basics single quotes example. And we're going to put in a line break there as well. And I'm also going to have an echo string that says the same exact thing. All right, and let's make this a lowercase. And again, I'm going to echo out the variable 2. All right, so I'm going to save that, load it up in my browser, and as we can see, we have the PHP basic single quotes example displayed twice. So as you can see here, you can use double quotes to create strings or single quotes. But for the following tutorials, I'll be using double quotes as the primary method for creating strings, as they allow you to use many special characters that you can't quite do with single quote strings. Alright, so some of the special characters that we can use, let me first write a comment here. For example, we can use the carriage return. So I'm going to declare a variable return, and I'm going to assign to it a string that says a carriage return is \r, end it with a semicolon. Another is the tab. I'm going to assign to it a tab is \t. Another one is the $sign. Assign to it a $sign is \$. And there are many others that you can use. So I'll provide some more special characters that you can use at the phpbasics.com. All right, so something else to mention here before we move on is if you escape a character that doesn't need to be, such as a single quote or apostrophe, the \/ will show up when you output the string. So let's say, for example, I have the echo string that says this is Robert's Xbox 360. So since we're using double quotes here, we don't need the \/ here. So I'm just going to save it so you can see what happens. So I'm going to refresh it, and as you can see, it says this is Roberts with a \/ Xbox 360. So remove that, we'll fix the problem, refresh the browser, and it displays just as it should. So the same thing with single quotes. If I use single quotes here instead, and I wanted to use this apostrophe, here is when I would need to use the backslash, because if I don't, it thinks that this echo string has ended here. And as you can see, this text lights up a different color, indicating that something is obviously wrong here. So save and refresh my browser, and again, it stays the same, which is correct. So moving on here, we can also create strings with what's called here doc. So let me just go ahead and make a comment here. So the previous methods are the main ways to create strings in most languages, but PHP allows us to use this here doc, which allows us to create multi-line strings without using quotes. So here doc does sound like it allows us to do more with that code, but it can be difficult for some, and it can easily lead to additional problems if you do not correctly code your string. So you may be asking, what does all this mean, or what does it look like? So let's create another example here. I'm going to create this variable, or declare this variable called a here doc, and I'm going to assign to it these necessary less than signs, 3 less than signs, and then I have to create this identifier, and I'm going to name it example. Then inside of this, I'm going to have the phpbasics.com has PHP tutorials for free. And then I'm going to end it with the identifier example with the semicolon. All right, so now I'm just going to go ahead and echo out this new variable that we created called a here doc, end it with a semicolon, save it, reload it in our browser. And as we can see here, it says the phpbasics.com has PHP tutorials for free. So as we can see here, we would think that each one of these lines would be on a separate line based on how it looks, but it doesn't. We actually do have to use HTML tags if we wish to do that. So let's put a line break right in front of it, save it, refresh our browser, and as we can see, it's on a new line right now. So there are some things you have to do, or some things you have to remember to do. So just to review here, in order to create this here doc, we have to start it with these 3 less than signs, and we also have to create some type of identifier, and this identifier can be named anything you want. I just chose to name it example. So when you're ready to end your here doc, so after I'm done typing what I want to say, I have to type this same identifier again and followed by a semicolon. All right, so lastly, this closing sequence example must also be on a line by itself, and it also cannot be tabbed. So pay close attention to this echo string here, and pay attention to mostly the colors of this echo string. So if I tab it over, which is incorrect, as you can see, this echo string turns to a different color. And of course, that's due to this type of text editor that I'm using. So in other words, that indicates that something is obviously wrong here. So if I saved it and I went over to my browser and refreshed it, we should get an error message, which we do. So we know something is wrong in our PHP scripting block. So moving it back over here, this echo string turns back to the normal color as it should be. And also, again, like I said, it must be on a single line. So if I had it up here again, this echo string turns to a different color, which it shouldn't be. So those are just some general rules that you should remember if you wish to use the here doc. And that does conclude this tutorial. And be sure to take the online quiz at thephpbasics.com. And I will see you in the next video.